Part 2. Genius. William Shakespeare was a genius. This answer is generally supplied to all questions relating to Shakespeare's apparent lack of qualifications for the title of the world's greatest author. Genius, however, has its limitations. Historian Thomas Macaulay said, "Genius will not furnish a poet with a vocabulary. It will not teach what word exactly corresponds with his idea and will most surely convey it to others. Information and experience are necessary for strengthening the imagination." About one third of Shakespeare's plays are either set in Italy or make specific references to events and locations there. Genius may explain the literary skills in Shakespeare's works, but does not supply knowledge of places never visited or languages never learned. 9. More than 50 possible candidates. There is a large selection of individuals who might have had a hand in the writing of Shakespeare's works. At last count, there were more than 5,000 books on the Shakespeare authorship question with more than 50 possible candidates. The three most popular are Francis Bacon, Christopher Marlowe, and currently the strongest alternative candidate, Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. All 50 candidates have one thing in common. Each is more likely to have written the works of Shakespeare than William Shakespeare himself. Elizabethan England was a land of brutal censorship. There was no freedom of speech. The Master of Revels and the dreaded Star Chamber had the power to imprison and torture any writer. The playwright Thomas Kyde was essentially tortured to death. Christopher Marlowe was facing torture when he was murdered, or some believe staged his own murder and escaped. Playwrights Ben Jonson, Thomas Nash, George Chapman, John Marston were all temporarily imprisoned for their writings. William Shakespeare, supposedly one of the most prolific and successful of the Elizabethan playwrights, was never arrested. This fact is particularly astonishing given the Earl of Essex sponsored a performance of his Richard II to encourage a rebellion against Queen Elizabeth I. The Earl of Essex was arrested and executed, but Shakespeare was never so much as questioned. At such an incredible, dangerous time for artists, remaining anonymous for an Elizabethan playwright would have been a wise choice. 10. Stratford. Stratford upon Avon is one of the most successful tourist sites in England, though only about 10% of its visitors ever attend a play. People come to see theater, not to see theater, but as pilgrims to worship a cult hero in his birthplace. As with virtually everything associated with the historical Shakespeare, the tourist sites in Stratford are pure speculation. It is fairly certain that the house on Henley Street is where Shakespeare was born and brought up, complete with, as the birthplace website proudly states, recreated replicas. The grammar school in Stratford has lost all records from the period, but is almost definitely where Shakespeare received his education. This institution even claims to have his original desk, which is third from the front on the left hand side. On and on, the fantasy is created with an avalanche of qualifiers like most biographers agree, and we are permitted to think, and we are warranted in believing, etc. In 1969, the people selling tours of Shakespeare Home were sued under England's Trade Descriptions Act, which forbids false statements and claims in advertising. The court ruled that the act did not apply since the historical site was a trust and not a business. The word trust perfectly applies to all things related to the playwright William Shakespeare. Trust being defined as the acceptance of the truth of a statement without evidence. No one knows for sure who wrote the works attributed to Shakespeare. What can be said with some certainty is that William Shakespeare did it.